Hello, everyone. Thank you for standing by. As a reminder, this event is being recorded and will be archived on constructionbusinessowner.com. I'm Kathy Wells, editor of Construction Business Owner magazine. Welcome to The Future of Payments, What's Next for AP, presented by Michelle Retzbach, Mike Carbino, and Construction Business Owner magazine. Today's webinar is sponsored by AvidXchange and will explore the era of automation and what it means for your business. AvidXchange is a leader in automating invoice and payment processes for mid-market businesses. It processes over $140 billion in transactions annually across its network of more than 600,000 suppliers, transforming the way 6,000 customers in North America pay their bills. It is my pleasure at this time to introduce our speakers, Ms. Michelle Retzbach and Mike Carbino. Michelle Retzbach specializes in helping companies streamline accounts payable operations and create efficiencies through automation and best practices with expertise specific to the construction and real estate industries. Mike Carbino has 30 years of experience in software, primarily focused on the construction industry. He holds a bachelor's degree in business management from the Stratford School of Technology and is a member of the Construction Financial Management Association, Mechanical Contractors Association of America, and Eastern Contractors Association. At this time, it is our pleasure to begin the webinar. Please stay tuned after the presentation for the interactive Q&A session. Throughout the presentation, we'll welcome your questions via the chat. If you have any questions for our speakers, drop them in there and we'll get to as many of them as possible in the Q&A following our presentation. Now I will go ahead and hand it over to Michelle to get things started. Michelle?
Thank you. Thanks so much. All right, well, happy to be here, and we have a fully packed agenda for you today. We're going to start by talking about the current state of business-to-business payments and kind of what that looks like today, how to position your business for success in the future, how technology can help do that, specifically for construction, and then how automation can help. That's a big part of what we're talking about today. And we will leave some time at the end for Q&A. So please be sure to submit your questions so we can get those answered for you at the end. So let's get started by talking about the current state of B2B payments. And I have a couple stats on the screen here. The first one you're looking at, 60% of total business-to-business payments, and it's upwards of 80% for those smaller organizations, but are still being made through paper checks. So, oftentimes the preference for paper checks comes from the mission to avoid a mismatch in the payment methods that are preferred by vendors or subs, or just because it's, what they're comfortable with. And, this is a general statistic, but if you think about it, if this number was run for construction only, I'm sure that number would be much higher than that 60% that we're looking at. So that next box there, 33% of middle market businesses, they're more likely to pay by check than larger organizations. And most construction businesses do fall within the middle market segment. So generally that's revenues of about $20 to $500 million per year. And while we don't know the precise reason for this, it's really been my experience in the AP world that it has a lot to do with vendor volume, geography, things like that. They're dealing with more localized personal vendor relationships that still want those paper checks. They just want to, have that physical paper check coming to them. And while businesses have a greater number of vendors or operate across larger regions, they might rely on those electronic payment methods for being able to track those e-payments easier. And then, over $2 billion annually is what we're spending on back office AP costs. So that's billion with a B. And if you think about it, it costs a typical AP department nearly $8 to process a single supplier payment. And 62% of that cost stems from labor. So that's, a pretty high percentage. And then the rest is from more of those tactical, the postage, the paper, check stock, other associated overhead costs. So, kind of think about those numbers and where you guys stand in that part of the statistics. So if we look at this graphic here, it points out a couple of current pain points that we see around the payment management and that payment process. Fraud risk. 49% of organizations globally said they've been a victim of fraud. So that's about half of the ones that we tagged are globally a victim of fraud. That's a large number there. Next, lack of visibility, having limited view or limited end-to-end view of transactions associated with multiple payment methods can really lead to out-of-budget expenses. So not being able to track those appropriately, which can also lead to project delays, chargebacks, things like that. Inaccurate data. So high volumes of manual data entry can really lead to significant errors. Think about wrong vendor payment delivery, if there's a bad address, faulty cross checks, human error for bank account numbers that are being keyed in, the list goes on and on. And then that last one, manual and cumbersome. So as we know, time is money. So companies are really paying for hours of employees' times dedicated to manual data entry and these manual tasks that could be spent on more impactful work on their day-to-day. So something to think about too. So Kathy, I think we have a poll that we can go ahead and get launched here.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. I'll go ahead and get things rolling on our first poll, and we are asking, what's your biggest challenge when sending or receiving B2B payments? Your options are getting payments approved or signed off on, getting checks or paper checks mailed, and then also documentation of payment status in the ERP system. So everybody take a second, go ahead and throw in your votes. We'd like to take a look at those responses as a group once we close the poll. And if there's another pain point that you're experiencing that is not listed here, go ahead and drop it in the chat because we'd like to know about it and talk about it too. We'll leave this up for just a couple seconds here. Give everybody a chance to vote. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. We'll take a look here. Share these results. All right. Looks like documentation is a pretty serious issue alongside also getting payments approved and signed off on. Paper checks still a problem. And Michelle, I think some of our content here today also indicates that, but I'll leave things in your hands now.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. I think I'm going to take over at this point, and thank you, Michelle. So positioning your business and AP department for success. Let's kick off this next session. Okay, a year of digital transformation, and certainly it has been. So if this past year of isolation and remote operations taught us anything, it's that digital transformation is possible and it is important. Think about a year ago, maybe just over a year ago, when people were still primarily working from an office and what have you, and then all of that changed almost overnight. And what happened was everyone had to transition very quickly to being able to do everything remotely. So we have a few more statistics to share. If you bear with me, it's actually recent and relevant stuff. In the past year and in the US, 88% of companies implemented new technologies to support cybersecurity, finance, and customer service as we adjusted to the new market conditions and adapted to meet changing customer needs. That's a whopping number, to say the least. And again, it speaks to the relevance of having to make the transition very quickly from being able to do everything, if you will, manually and in the office to simply having to work from remote locations and doing everything more digitally. 46% of business leaders anticipate at least half of AP and payment processes will go digital in 2021. The 2021 Ardent Partners AP Metrics That Matter benchmark tells us 69% of invoices still arrive by paper, and only 31% are sent digitally. It's an improvement over 2020 when those numbers were 75-25, but you can see that there's still a great deal of improvement that could take place here with respect to receiving invoices digitally by email rather than through the mail. And lastly, 64% of middle market businesses say they have the right technology in place to enable a fully remote workforce now, compared to just 37% at this time last year. So again, that transition took place very quickly. What's this mean? The point of all this is really to acknowledge that businesses are changing to a more automated landscape to be more efficient. And automation is just getting more prevalent. So in this next slide, the title is Those Who Navigate the Transition from Manual to Digital Automation Will Be Well Positioned for Future Success. Absolutely. The digital era, it's here. It's among us, and it's been here for a while, and technologies are continuing to advance all the time to meet the demands of markets, and it's happening rapidly. And again, I keep saying this over and over again, but this past year taught us that this process of transitioning to, from manual to digital was more important than ever. And for those companies that have already made that transition, they're well positioned for future success. Robust security is now commonplace. Employees are becoming more and more tech savvy. Cloud solutions are the new norm. Lean, automated, mobile data in real time is expected, and it's relied upon. So again, if you're not doing this and you're not making that transition, I would recommend that you do so. Okay, technology. Oh, sorry, Michelle. I think this is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, those are some impressive statistics. So thanks for sharing those. So yeah, we're going to kind of dive into the technology side of it a little bit. Bear with me, some of it gets a little robotic here, but I'm not going to read all of the statistics that are here on this slide, but I am going to break it down and kind of give you some information on what you need to know about artificial intelligence or AI. The point is, it's everywhere, from the manufacturing of shingles to the warehouses of prefab lumber. It's also in our computers, I'm sure, as many of you know. So from the data that is being collected from the marketplace and even at the organizational level. So yeah, even accounting software uses AI to do things like extract the invoice data off the invoices. So, feel free to kind of read through some of the stats that you see on the slide, but I also want to bring up two more that I had noted down. 80% of accounting execs believe that AI leads to a competitive advantage, and 79% say it can increase the productivity of their company. And then 66% of accountants are ready to invest in AI, out of which 55% plan on using it in the next 3 years. So those are really recent statistics that I found interesting that I wanted to add in as well around AI. So then the next kind of topic here is machine learning and big data. So similar to AI, machine learning is really all around us. It can help identify and evaluate risk indicators. It can help uncover any unusual patterns or threats. I know at our organization, we use it for several things like that to look out for fraudulent invoices and things that are going on being submitted behind the scenes. So it can help reduce fraud and identify future opportunities as well. So, a type of machine learning predictive analytics will really help to identify fraud activities and helps to forecast business events, which can be really useful in certain scenarios. Like I said, at my organization, AvidXchange, machine learning technology is used to not only automate AP and the payment process, but also to help companies improve cash flow by reviewing historical payment data and using that predictive analytics to receive electronic payments sooner on approved invoices. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Mike, I think you're up.
I am. Thank you, Michelle. Automated accounts payable. So whether it's API integrations, machine learning, or cloud computing, don't be frightened. The digital transformation is here to stay. And it's really a lot less complicated for users like business owners and accounting personnel who are actually putting the tools to use. Automating your processes and building a scalable financial system that enables your team to focus more on analyzing data than retrieving and entering doesn't just start at the forecasting level. You should look to build it from the foundation, all the way from the purchase to the payment. And that's really the key here, is that whole purchase to pay process and how you look at this from an automation perspective. So by automating AP, you gain efficiency, flexibility, security. You can save money, obviously. And you're improving business relationships. So let's dive into the purple segment for just a second and consider this. Virtual cards represent the greatest opportunity for commercial payment growth and have gained wide interest among companies looking to improve working capital. And as many suppliers are struggling financially, some are already preparing to accept virtual cards to get paid faster. Okay. The next part, the current AP process. So let's look at the current process. And if this is being done manually, you're probably quite familiar with these steps. So we have the invoice. The invoice comes in. The invoice the mail has to be opened by someone. If there's a purchase order that's associated with that invoice, typically we have to find that purchase order. We have to match it up with the invoice. It gets routed to an approver. How does that happen? Well, in a manual process, typically the invoice and any of the supporting documents like the purchase order have to be placed in someone's folder. And then that approver, for example, maybe it's a project manager, they have to pick up the folder and then they have to code the invoice. They typically do this manually. They're handwriting on the invoice. They go through, they do that approval process. Who knows when accounting's actually going to get that approved invoice back, when that approver actually gets to the point of being able to go through and code. So then that information then updates the budget info, updates the accounting system. It gets posted to the general ledger. Payments are made. All the documents are filed. And then when there is any opportunity, for example, to have to take backup to support, for example, a time and material or cost plus billing, it usually has to be pulled out of the filing cabinet. All of this is being done manually. It takes time and it costs money. So Kathy, I think at this point, we are going to take a poll.
Sure thing, Mike. Thank you. We'll go ahead and launch our second and final poll here. And our question to you is, how many hours a day does your AP staff spend on manual processes? Are you in the low end of the scale, 1 to 10 hours or 11 to 25 hours? Does your staff land somewhere in the middle, maybe 26 to 50 hours? Or are you on the higher end of the scale with that time looking more like 51 to 100 hours or over 100 hours? Everybody take a quick second, throw your votes in there, and we'll take a look at the results in just a second. We'll give everybody just a few more seconds. I want to make sure we've got all the votes in as we can. And thank you again for your participation here. All right, we'll go ahead and close it out. and share these results. And Mike, I'll let you comment on these, but it looks like 1 to 10, mostly on the low end, but also some on the higher end, some over 100 hours.
Right, this is interesting. At least 40% of those that responded are taking more than 26 hours to process AP manually, which is interesting. So there's a lot that we can still do and hopefully address a lot of those issues as we go forward. Okay. So what your future AP process could look like. It could look like this. So you saw those steps that we talked about before. I think there were probably, I couldn't even count, maybe about 12 steps involved in the manual process. And if we move this to a more automated process, we could do this in probably 3 steps, maybe less. We're talking about coding, we're talking about approving, we're talking about posting to your financials. Simple, easy. And even when we talk about coding, we don't necessarily have to refer to coding manually. We can talk about, and we go back to what Michelle referenced earlier, machine learning technology, AI, those things. That allows for being able to read a document, read an invoice, for example, and populate the invoice entry process so that that doesn't have to be entered manually. The approval process can all be done remotely. And then that information gets passed to the ERP system for posting within the general ledger. So we can take this process and we can eliminate a lot of the steps involved, streamline it, make it faster, more efficient, and save money. Okay, let's start to talk a little more about the available technologies in AP automation. Okay, so eliminating the touch points here. So we talked about those, again, what were there, about 11 or 12 steps, and we dropped that down to 3, 11 versus 3. Okay, so what actually happens? What's the benefit of fewer steps? Well, the product that I'm most familiar with is a product called TimberScan. And for the TimberScan users, a product designed for Sage 300 CRE, they can speed up their AP process, that approval process that we were talking about, by up to 300%. For those folks that are using AvidPay, a product designed for automating electronic payments, speeding that process, you can basically cut that in half. And that's just the time savings. We can talk about costs in a little bit, but again, we're talking about becoming more efficient, speeding things up, eliminating a number of steps in the process, and simply making you more efficient, saving time, saving money, and allowing you to be able to do other things that can benefit you and the organization. The purchase to pay process. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us on a bit of a journey. And we're going to start at the point, not when an invoice arrives at your door, but let's actually go and precede that. So in many cases, what happens? A purchase order is created initially. That purchase order could have been created manually. It could have been created within your ERP system. It could have been created within the purchase to pay application, for example, the TimberScan application that I was talking about a few minutes ago. But regardless of where that purchase order is created, that's the start of the process. So the purchase order is step 1. Along with that, there could be other things that are happening outside of the invoice arrival at your door. There could be things like reimbursable expenses. There could be credit card transactional purchases that are being made. They're all taking place preceding the invoice arrival at your door. So then when that invoice arrives, let's go back and let's think about some of the electronic or digital steps that we could take to eliminate the manual process. So we started with a purchase order, or we started with, or maybe there's a receiver that's associated with that PO. So now we have a purchase order. We know what we purchased. We know what we received. Now the invoice arrives. Instead of the invoice coming in the mail, we can eliminate that step if we can have the vendors send those invoices in by email. Now, there are systems like, for example, I referenced TimberScan, where you can take the emailed invoice, drop it right into the AP entry screen, and then using the OCR tool, you've now acquired an invoice without touching the paper. You've dropped it into AP entry. You used OCR to code, let's say, we'll call it the header information, where it plugged in, for example, things like vendor number, invoice number, date, amount. And then we can match it against the purchase order or the commitment and pull up all of the received lines on that particular purchase order, create a three-way match. So now, literally without anyone having to touch a piece of paper, we have acquired an invoice, we've processed the invoice, we did a three-way match against the purchase order and the receiver, and then we send it off to the approver. The approver gets the invoice electronically, typically might get an email. They could click on the email, and from that email, it opens up their approval app. They can go through, they can look at what they need to approve. They can say that if they need to code the invoice, they can do that. And then once they're finished with that process, they hit approve. That invoice ultimately gets sent into the ERP system, the accounting system. Then your financials are updated all along the way. We never touched the paper. Nothing had to be passed manually. Everything was done electronically. Once the ERP system and financials are updated, then they're at the point where payments can be made. Rather than having to cut a check and put a check into an envelope and mail it, why not use electronic payments? Make it easier. Allow for that process to happen automatically, seamlessly, get those payments made, and you can still control when the actual payment and when the release of those funds take place. So as a check approver or check signer or a payment approver, you can still look at the invoices. You can see what that payment is being made for. You release the funds, and we took that entire purchase to pay process. We made it digital. No one had to touch a piece of paper anywhere along the way. Okay. So AP approval automation. There are a number of different, we'll call different solutions, ERP solutions out there. Some of the ones that I'm familiar with are, for example, Sage 300 CRE, Sage 100, Acumatica, and more recently, Sage Intacct, which is becoming more prevalent now within the Sage community. It's something that most construction companies, this approval automation, most companies are adapting to this, and they love this. It eliminates the tasks of so many different people within the organization. So, that part starts everything. From there, things then work automatically through that particular AP solution and allow you to be able to integrate with that ERP system. Some of the things that you can do, for example, when you're entering an invoice, have the invoice information look exactly like it would in the ERP, so that you're not having to learn a new AP entry system. You're just using the same experience that you would use if, for example, you were inside the ERP. But from there, you're able to control everything through that routing and approval process. So there are a lot of other construction ERPs, that have connecting AP approval systems, just to be clear. But I think what's important is to just make sure that you find a system that will allow you to be able to have the same type of user experience as if you were working in the ERP, but consider it an extension of that ERP system. Okay, one last thing here with regard to the importing of the invoices. And I talked about this, and I kind of alluded to this before. So obviously, some vendors are still, sending in invoices by mail, but the preferred method today is really by email. And if we go back again to about a year ago, when everyone was having to work remotely or work from home, It's not very easy to be able to, gather up invoices that came in the mail and be able to process them the same way that you potentially could have, in years past. So the preferred method would be to get those invoices in by way of email. And then the system can just acquire them automatically. There's no need for any user intervention if that's the way that you could have them acquired. And then once they're acquired, again, you can use the OCR technology to be able to read the invoice, and it will then analyze the invoice, populate the AP entry process, and then from there, allow that invoice to be sent off for electronic approval. So just kind of reiterating what we were talking about a few minutes ago, but just think about the ways that you can eliminate steps in the process. Don't have to open the mail every time an invoice comes in and sort through those invoices manually. You can do it all electronically. No need to have to necessarily scan the invoices in. No need to have to code the invoices. No need to have to manually send them off to approvers. All of this can be done electronically. I think, Michelle, it's your turn.
Yeah, thanks. I'll give you a break there. That was good though. Thanks for breaking that down and walking us through all the steps. I think it's helpful to kind of see and talk through what that journey would look like as you automate parts of that process. So I'll actually talk about, another part of the AP automation aspect, and that's the payment side of things. So the final step, getting the payment out the door. The part of the process that really declares a job done and the one that you've really got to get right. So, we at AvidXchange, for example, have a lot of experience in this area, and we have built a really mature payment network with nearly 700,000 vendors and suppliers in that network. And I will say that I think it helps, when you're thinking about an AP automation tool, to look into, the network itself, because that's really going to help make for a streamlined and easier adoption when bringing your subs and vendors onto, a tool like AvidPay. So there's going to be a lot of vendors already in that network getting paid, know how the process works. They've already said, hey, I want to be paid by this method, whether that be an electronic payment or just still a paper check. But just kind of remember to keep in mind that network and the maturity of the network. And with that, becomes the speed of payments. So we also want to think about how quickly payments are getting out the door. And if they've already raised their hand and said, I want to be paid by a virtual card or a direct deposit, that's going to help speed up that process as well. And in turn, it will help you get, early payment discounts. There's a potential for rebate opportunity if vendors opt for an electronic payment method. And, in our network, for example, we have over 300,000 suppliers and subs already enrolled in taking one of those e-payment options. So if you think about those e-payments, it's really making you streamline that process, taking advantage of the speed of the network, and getting those payments out the door accurately and quickly. And then, of course, there's that added benefit of not having to pay for postage anymore or spend your day getting paper cuts, stuffing envelopes. You'll have a completely digitized process on the back end from a payments perspective as well. So let's kind of look at how an automated payment process would work. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a somewhat standard process, but I'm going to present it based on how AvidXchange would do things in relation to automation, since of course that's what I'm most familiar with. So our pay service is a full service offering. So it has the software side of things, which can give you and your team control over payment approvals, give you that added full visibility into where your payments are in the process. But we also provide a services component that's really going to offload a lot of those manual tasks as well. It helps reduce, that paper pushing, envelope stuffing, those really paper-based tasks that do take up a lot of accounting staff's time. So if you look at the diagram we have here, it all starts in your accounting system. So reviewing your accounting system just like you would today, and selecting the invoices that you're ready to make payment on. So once you've made those selections, you're really going to create a check run or check file just how you would today. But then instead of printing a stack of checks at your local printer, you're now going to have the ability to send a single payment file over to, an automated tool or the payment network. So remember, you're going to use those same cash decisions that you would today. So you're not losing that control, but you're gaining that ability to just compile everything into a single payment file and send that away for execution on the payments within that file. So for any organizations that have check signers or maybe dual signers in place, depending on certain conditions or maybe dollar amounts, we can set those workflows up in our tool so that all payments can be reviewed before any funds are withdrawn for these particular payments. So that's kind of dependent on, your particular situation. But essentially money is going to be pulled from your issuing bank accounts. And then there's those multiple ways suppliers and subs can get paid. So basically, if they're in the network, they will already be opted for whatever payment method they've raised their hand for. Otherwise, we have a full services team that's going to educate them on the payment methods and see what works best for them. So they're going to take the payment method that works best. And then, reconciliation is essentially a breeze because we are taking the funds out of your account that same day. So from a GL perspective, everything clearing that same day. And we have a services team following up on those payments as well. So that's kind of, end to end what it would look like to automate some of that process on the payment side of things. So, that's kind of it as far as the process that we wanted to walk through with you. Some of the things we want to point out is the automation world is really full of potential if you have not tapped into it yet. It doesn't have to be all at the same time. Some organizations choose to take off small chunks. But we wanted to be able to touch on all the possibilities and lessen that intimidation factor that automation can have on some business owners and business professionals who may not be, looped in the IT world. It really isn't as daunting as some folks think. So streamlining processes and approvals saves so much time and money. Your bottom line will definitely thank you, and thank you quickly. We have customers all the time that they start to see results almost immediately. And it's just so refreshing for them to be able to implement some software and then quickly be able to see their bottom line affected. So I think that's something that we can speak to as well. And so, there are many advantages to automation like we've talked through today, and centralizing your documentation, around security and accessibility. And there are many solutions out there that address these challenges and hurdles. So definitely do your due diligence. Mike and I are here to answer questions. We're very thankful that you joined us on this automation discussion today, and we'll kind of open it up for any questions that you all might have.
Thank you, Michelle and Mike. This presentation was packed with stats and solutions that definitely has our attendees thinking. We've had a handful of questions come through the chat during the presentation. So yeah, at this time, let's go ahead and kick off the Q&A. And Michelle and Mike, if you're ready, we're just going to jump right in. And attendees, if you have questions, please feel free to throw those into the chat and we'll get to as many of them as we can, okay? Mike, we're going to start with you. I think this is where you may be able to answer best. What do you see as the most popular method for construction accounting processes today? Is it manual AP approvals with automated payments, automated approvals with manual payments, or are most construction businesses already onto the automating of both pieces? I'd love to hear your feedback.
I would say that, sadly, from my perspective anyway, the majority of companies have not automated the entire, what I'll call the purchase to pay process. They may have automated a portion of it. I would say perhaps more companies have automated the approval process than the payment process, still doing the payments manually. But I think hopefully what Michelle and I were able to demonstrate and explain today is how simple and easy it is to automate from end to end without losing any control along the way.
Great. Yeah. And the presentation made a ton of great points about what automation can do for these processes. And I'd like to rewind just a little bit. Earlier, we were talking about pain points. And one of our attendees brought up a couple of situations I wanted to highlight. One being paying some vendors by a check and some by a direct deposit is frustrating. And then also some subs just send their invoices straight to the project manager and don't copy accounting on any level. So those payments are easily lost. Those are just two of the frustrating situations that contractors and their accounting departments are facing. So I'd like to put it to both of our speakers. In your experience, how can automation help to solve these problems?
Yeah, I can jump in here to kind of start, and then Mike, if you want to add anything in. Those are really great points. So, the first part of it with having to pay some subs in one form of payment and others in another form of payment, it kind of goes back to that diagram that I showed where you're still making your same cash decisions and saying, I'm ready to pay this vendor. But taking advantage of that network and the different payment options that, like AvidXchange would offer, for example, and being able to just send a single payment file to the network and not have to determine or maintain banking information on behalf of that vendor. That's part of the services component where we're going to work with vendors to pay them how they want to be paid, set up and maintain their payment information. So that you don't have to do that. So that's a great point to bring up, and kind of a way that automation does help with that. And then on the invoice submission side, again, great point that I hear, probably daily or weekly from customers I work with. They want their accounting intake process to be centralized, but unfortunately, they have people who might get handed an invoice on a job, or, sends it directly to their email address, their personal email address, going directly to the PM, and then accounting never even knows. It's jammed in someone's door, compartment or whatever it may be. So I totally hear you on that. And remember, that's another part of that intake process where we can centralize and become that central repository for all vendors and subs to send invoices into. And that way everybody has full visibility into what's being received and what's come in. And so if there is something that you're missing or sitting in someone's queue, you have the ability to see that and kind of nudge that person or take action if needed.
And I would, second that, Michelle. I think absolutely you have to create a more centralized process, because if for nothing else, you have to have that visibility. You need to know when the invoice arrived, when it was sent off for approval and what have you. And if it's not coming in to a kind of a central repository and you're starting to lose that control, that's when the inefficiency starts. And you never know when you're actually going to get the invoice from, for example, a project manager. So absolutely, I agree 100% that it has to start with centralizing that process.
Great information. Thank you guys so much for both of you for answering that one. We'll roll into the next question here. We've got kind of a scenario from an attendee. They're currently using Sage 300 Contractor, but plan to move to Sage Intact by the end of the year. Tell us, can they start using TimberScan and AvidPay now, or should they wait until they're on Intact to move forward?
So I can take that one. My recommendation would be start now, because the way that TimberScan and AvidPay are designed, it won't matter with respect to, it's not like you're going to have to stop and start again once you transition from Sage 300 CRE to Sage Intact. You're able to continue to move forward with, in essence, with the same technology. TimberScan has actually designed we'll call it a cloud-based solution for Sage Intact. It works exclusively for Intact, and AvidPay as well works with Sage Intact. So I would recommend start now, because now you're going to become more efficient. You'll understand how TimberScan and AvidPay work, and then you can just make the transition very quickly and very easily without hardly any fanfare at all.
Thank you, Mike. We've got one more question a little bit tied to the AvidXchange products. This attendee is asking, can we use AvidPay without AvidVoice and TimberScan?
Yeah, I can take that one. And thanks for the question. So you can, yes, they are standalone products. Now I will say, I always give this example where it's kind of like chocolate and peanut butter. If you're a sweets person like me, they go great together, but they are good on their own as well. So yes, the answer, you can use them standalone, but they do work great together, and you're going to get some added benefits with streamlining the process and visibility, things like that, if you kind of use the end-to-end solution. I don't know, Mike, if there's anything you want to add there from a technology standpoint, but
No, Michelle, I think that's perfect. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. There are circumstances where you may be using one without the other, and although we feel like using both makes for a more complete automated solution, there are circumstances where, for example, AvidPay may work for an ERP that TimberScan is not integrated with yet. So absolutely.
All right, thanks. We've got a couple more questions to get to. And Michelle, this may hit on what we covered in an earlier question, but this attendee is saying some of our vendors insist on a paper check. They insist. We send about 25 a month at least, while others request ACH or direct pay. Do you have any resources to help them convince to change their ways and get off the paper checks?
Yeah. So that is kind of in line a little bit with the previous topic that was brought up around, taking advantage of the single payment file, but kind of zeroing in more on, convincing them, if you will, to take advantage of the e-payments. I will say that comes from the services teams or services component. I can speak from an AvidXchange perspective here, but it's really one of our areas of expertise is we have a services team of over 400 people that are dealing with the vendors and subs, educating them on the payment methods, letting them know about the benefits. They are going to present the e-payment options to them first as payment methods, and let them know about the benefits of the security, the speed of the payment, the delivery, how they're still going to get rich remittance detail on those payments so they know what it's for, and just really try to hit home on the education piece. So as far as resources, like I said, from an AvidXchange perspective, we do have that services component that is really a great differentiator that helps educate and, quote unquote, convince, if you will, for the benefits of e-payments. Hope that answered that.
Yeah, I think so. And we're going to hit one last question before we close things up today. And this is, I think, a great question. How can I bring this option to my CFO? They're curious how long the demo might take, or if there's a timeline on pricing, pricing out a solution. Mike or Michelle, happy to hear from either of you.
Sure, I can take that. And Michelle, if you wanted to add anything, that'd be great. But to schedule a demonstration, typically we do most of all of our demonstrations remotely using things like Zoom or Teams or GoToMeeting. So it's very easy for people to be able to connect. A typical presentation takes between 60 and 90 minutes if you wanted to do an end-to-end purchase to pay demonstration. And I would also say that if you were looking for pricing, if you need something this afternoon, we can get it to you.
That's great, Mike. Michelle, anything to add before we wrap up?
I guess just the only thing I'll add there is, we understand that CFOs and other executives are quite busy. So if it made sense to kind of do a first look demonstration with some team members and then kind of shorten it into more of just a streamlined kind of pain points demo or ROI conversation for the CFO or CEO, we can always do that as well. So definitely let us know if that's something that we can help with, and we can tailor it to your needs.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, everybody, that does it for questions today, which brings our webinar to a close. We'd like to thank Michelle and Mike for all this awesome information, and thank you to our attendees for all your great questions. As I mentioned in the chat here, we will be sending out an email to share access to the playback of today's event, but also feel free to visit constructionbusinessowner.com to check out more topics and more educational webinars. Thanks again to Michelle and Mike for sharing their expert advice, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join us. I hope you all have a great afternoon.